I've been hauling freight for almost 15 years, and I've seen my fair share of strange things on the road. But nothing has ever come close to what happened that night in 2017. I was running an overnight haul through the vast, empty stretch of desert between Nevada and Utah. A straight shot, no major stops, just miles of black highway stretching in every direction. My headlights were dim, something I had meant to fix for weeks, but work had been slow, and money was tight. As long as I could see the faded lines on the asphalt, I figured I'd manage. The desert at night has a stillness that plays tricks on you. There's no sound except the low hum of your engine, and no movement except what your headlights carve out of the dark. It makes you question what's real and what's just your mind filling in the silence. I was debating pulling over to rest when I spotted something in the distance, something stationary in the middle of the road. My first thought was an animal, maybe a coyote, but as I closed the distance, I saw the glint of taillights flashing weakly. It was a car. The hazard lights blinked sluggishly, almost like the battery was dying. The weirdest part? It was parked dead center on the double yellow, and the passenger door was hanging open. I slammed my brakes, my truck shuddering to a stop just a few feet from the abandoned vehicle. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. This didn't feel right. I should have kept driving. But curiosity, or maybe stupidity, got the better of me. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out onto the cracked asphalt, boots crunching on loose gravel. The air was thick and dry, the silence stretching unnaturally. The desert seemed too quiet, like even the insects were holding their breath. I circled the car, a newish-looking sedan, clean but eerily lifeless. No signs of damage, no broken glass, just empty. The driver's seat was vacant, and the keys were still in the ignition. My skin prickled. "Hello," I called into the night. My voice sounded small, swallowed by the darkness. No answer. I peered into the back seat, expecting to find someone slumped over, maybe asleep. But the interior was pristine, not even a stray jacket or fast food wrapper. Then I noticed the trunk. It was slightly ajar, just enough to make my stomach twist. Something about it felt wrong. I hesitated. Every instinct told me to get back in my truck and leave, but I reached for the handle anyway. Locked. I turned toward the car's interior, eyeing the keys. My pulse hammered in my ears as I leaned in and grabbed them from the ignition. My hand felt clammy, the air around me somehow heavier than before. I slid the key into the trunk lock, took a deep breath, and turned it. The trunk didn't pop open, it groaned. Something inside was jamming it shut. I moved to the back seat, trying to access the trunk from inside the car. The moment I pulled the backrest forward, my stomach dropped. 3 black plastic bags were stuffed inside. They were bulging, tied tightly with rope. Before I could react, the night exploded with the crack of a gunshot. I jerked back, slamming my head on the car's roof. My vision blurred, heart pounding as adrenaline surged through me. Then I heard footsteps. Fast, uneven, coming right at me. I scrambled out of the car, my eyes darting toward the darkness beyond the headlights. A figure emerged from the night, a short, stocky man with wild red hair. His clothes were filthy, his boots caked in dirt. In one hand, he gripped a rusted shovel. In the other, a rifle. We locked eyes. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then his expression changed, his brow furrowed, eyes darting between me and the car. "Wait," he shouted, voice hoarse and desperate. "Don't." I didn't wait to hear the rest. I lunged for my truck, shoving the door open just as another shot rang out. The sound echoed through the desert, deafening. I fumbled with the keys, my fingers shaking as I jammed them into the ignition. The engine stalled. I cursed, slamming my fist against the dash. In the rearview mirror, the man dropped his shovel and started sprinting toward me. His mouth was moving, shouting something, but I couldn't hear him over the blood rushing in my ears. I tried the ignition again. This time, the truck roared to life. As I peeled away, gravel spraying behind me, I saw him in my side mirror. He wasn't chasing me. He was running back toward the car, back toward the trunk. I didn't slow down. I kept my foot on the gas, my knuckles white against the wheel. It wasn't until 5 miles later that I checked my mirrors again. And that's when I saw them. Headlights. Fast. Coming straight for me. I kept my eyes on the mirror, my breathing ragged. The car was coming fast, way too fast for those desert roads. The weak glow of my taillights barely cut through the blackness, but I could see the flickering beams of his headlights weaving erratically behind me. The bastard was chasing me. I pushed my semi harder, my hands clammy against the wheel. The speedometer needle inched higher than it should have, but I didn't care. My trailer groaned with the sudden acceleration, the heavy cargo swaying, but there was no way I was stopping. I grabbed my phone, my fingers trembling as I hit 911. A robotic voice told me I had no signal. I swore under my breath. I was in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by miles of sand and silence. I checked the mirror again. The car was closer. Way too close. Then he honked, long and frantic, like he was trying to get my attention. I ignored it, keeping my foot pressed on the gas. My truck roared, eating up the road, but the sedan was right on my tail. Then, suddenly, he cut in front of me. His car swerved, skidding sideways, forcing me to slam the brakes. My tires screamed against the asphalt as the semi lurched violently forward, my cargo slamming against the trailer walls. I barely avoided plowing straight into him. I threw the truck into neutral, my chest heaving as I watched him step out of the sedan. The red-haired man from before. He was breathing hard, hands trembling at his sides. His gun was gone, left behind or lost somewhere in the chase, but his shovel still hung from his grip. He wasn't aiming at me. He wasn't running at me. He just stood there, bathed in my headlights, shaking his head. Then he did something I didn't expect. He dropped the shovel. He raised his hands, as if pleading. I kept my foot on the gas, ready to tear out of there, but something in his expression stopped me. He didn't look angry. He didn't look crazy. He looked scared. Not of me, of something else. Then he shouted, his voice barely carrying over the low rumble of my engine. "It's not what you think." I hesitated. Every instinct screamed at me to drive, to get the hell out of there. But something about the way he said it made my stomach twist. Before I could respond, the trunk of the sedan started moving. My breath hitched. At first, I thought I imagined it, a flicker of movement in the corner of my eye. But no, it was shaking. A muffled thump came from inside. Then another. Then a low, guttural growl. I felt my pulse hammer against my skull as I watched the trunk lid tremble. The man turned to look at it, his face going pale under the glow of my headlights. Oh, shit. The trunk exploded open. A hand shot out, long, gaunt fingers stretching unnaturally wide, black and nails curling at the tips. Then came the head. My stomach twisted into a knot so tight I thought I might be sick. It wasn't human. The face was stretched, skin waxy and wrong, like it had been melted and put back together. Its eyes were pitch black, bulging, reflecting the light from my truck like glass. Its mouth hung open in a twisted, silent scream, revealing teeth that were too many, too jagged. It pulled itself up, its limbs unnatural, its joints popping like brittle wood. Then it crawled out of the trunk. Not climbed, crawled, its limbs bending the wrong way, like a marionette with broken strings. The man in front of me staggered back, shaking his head violently. It wasn't supposed to wake up, he screamed. The thing let out a shrieking hiss, its mouth stretching impossibly wide, too wide, its jaw unhinging like a snake's. Then it turned toward me. The red-haired man was already running, but I couldn't move. The thing jerked forward, its spindly limbs skittering across the pavement as it rushed toward my truck. I felt something deep in my gut, a primal kind of terror, the kind that freezes you to your core. Then, my body finally caught up. I slammed the truck into gear. The monster lunged, its two long arms reaching out just as I gunned it forward. The last thing I saw in my mirror was the creature leaping not at the man, not at the car, but at the darkness of the desert beyond. I didn't stop driving for the next 2 hours. I didn't even breathe properly until I saw city lights in the distance. I never found out what was in that trunk before it woke up. And I never want to. Story 2. I never used to be afraid of silence. Being a trucker, you learn to live with it. The endless hours on the road, the empty stretches of highway at night, the isolation, it's just part of the job. At first, the loneliness eats at you, makes you itch for a radio station that doesn't cut out in the middle of nowhere. But over time, the silence becomes familiar, almost comforting. At least, that's what I thought before that night. It was my 3rd month on the job. A long haul from Pennsylvania to Illinois, 12 hours of uninterrupted driving through mostly empty roads. I was exhausted before I even started, the kind of exhaustion that settles in your bones and makes your head feel too heavy for your shoulders. But I was young, eager, and stupid. I figured if I drove through the night, I could make my delivery early and impress my dispatcher. It was past 2 a.m. when I realized I had made a mistake. My eyelids were drooping, my head dipping slightly before I forced myself awake. I had already been on the road for 10 hours straight, running on fumes and sheer willpower. I reached for my last energy drink from the cup holder, but my fingers only met empty air. Shit, I had forgotten to restock. I cursed under my breath and checked the GPS. The next truck stop was 40 miles away, too far. I wouldn't make it without risking dozing off. A few miles ahead, I spotted something in the distance, a gas station. I didn't remember seeing it on my route, but I wasn't about to question a miracle. The sign was old, flickering weakly, but the building itself looked open. The gravel crunched under my tires as I pulled into the lot, parking near the entrance. The first thing I noticed was that the place was too quiet. No cars at the pumps, no movement inside, but the neon open sign buzzed faintly in the window, casting a sickly red glow onto the pavement. I hesitated. Something about it felt off, but I was too damn tired to care. I needed caffeine now. I pushed the door open. The bell didn't ring. The air inside was stale, thick with the scent of dust, and something faintly metallic. The overhead lights flickered, making the shelves of snacks and dusty racks of sunglasses cast long, shifting shadows. The place was empty. "Hello," I called. My voice felt too loud in the stillness. No answer. My eyes landed on the refrigerated section at the back. The door was slightly ajar, a dim light glowing from within. A single fridge unit, buzzing faintly. I made my way toward it, stepping carefully over the cracked tile. Something about the silence was starting to get to me. I pulled the fridge door open. Empty. No sodas, no energy drinks. Just rows of dust-lined shelves. I frowned. Then, behind me, clatter. I spun around. A display rack near the counter had fallen over. I hadn't touched it. There was no wind, no movement. The store was still empty. My pulse quickened. I was not alone. Then I noticed something. The security camera monitor behind the counter. 5 black and white screens displayed different parts of the store, flickering slightly. My stomach tightened. In the first screen, I saw the parking lot, my truck sitting alone, surrounded by darkness. In the second, the front entrance, closed, still, undisturbed. In the third, an aisle filled with expired snacks. In the fourth, the back storage room, a dark hallway leading to a door slightly ajar. Then I looked at the fifth screen, and my blood ran cold, because it showed the inside of my truck's cab, and there was someone sitting in the driver's seat. I whipped around and bolted for the door, my boots slamming against the tile. The moment I stepped outside, my truck's headlights flicked on. A figure was behind the wheel, unmoving, watching me. Then the engine rumbled to life, and the truck lurched forward, straight at me. I had no time to think. The truck was coming straight for me, its headlights flooding the empty parking lot with harsh white light. The engine roared, tires screeching against the pavement as the massive vehicle lurched forward. I ran. My legs burned as I sprinted toward the side of the gas station, barely dodging a rusted newspaper stand. The truck missed me by inches, its massive grille passing so close that I felt the heat from the engine. My heart slammed against my ribs as I heard it skid to a stop. I ducked behind the building, chest heaving, my mind racing. Someone was in my truck. Someone had been inside the whole time. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to think. I needed to get out of here, but there was no way in hell I was getting back in that semi. I peered around the corner. The truck sat idling in the lot, steam curling from the engine. The driver's seat was empty. The door was wide open. I clenched my jaw. No way. This was wrong. A game. A trap. Then I heard it. A wet, scraping noise. It came from underneath the truck. My stomach dropped. The space beneath the semi was pitch black, but I could see movement, something shifting, unfolding itself from the shadows. A pair of pale hands emerged first, pressing against the ground. The fingers were too long, the knuckles jutting out sharply, bending the wrong way as they gripped the pavement. Then, slowly, it pulled itself forward. I barely held back a scream. The thing crawled out from under my truck, its body impossibly thin, limbs stretched and wrong. Its head was tilted too far to the side, as if its neck had been broken and never healed properly. But the worst part? Its face. It was wearing my face. Not a mask, not a reflection. My actual face, stretched over its skull like damp, ill-fitting skin. The lips curled into a mockery of a smile. It knew I was watching. I stumbled back, my boots slipping against the gravel. The thing twitched, its head jerking toward me. Then, in a voice identical to mine, it spoke. "You left the door unlocked." My stomach turned. I hadn't checked the back of the truck when I left. I had been too damn tired. Had it been there the whole time? Had it watched me drive? It started moving toward me, each step a jerky, unnatural shuffle. The truck's headlights flickered. I ran. I tore around the building, my mind screaming for an escape. The convenience store was out of the question. I wasn't trapping myself inside. The lot was empty, the desert stretching endlessly beyond. I spotted something in the distance, an old, rusted pickup truck, parked near a dumpster. The keys were probably inside the station, but I wasn't going back in there. Instead, I sprinted toward the pickup, hoping, praying that the door was unlocked. It was. I threw myself inside, slamming the lock down. My hand shook as I reached for the wires under the dashboard, yanking them free. Years of trucking had taught me a few things. How to hotwire a vehicle was one of them. Behind me, I heard footsteps. Slow, uneven, getting closer. I forced my fingers to stop shaking, twisting the wires together. Come on, come on. The truck coughed. The footsteps sped up. I risked a glance in the side mirror. The thing was right there. Its body was pressed against the driver's side window, that grotesque copy of my own face leering at me through the glass. Then, in my own voice, it whispered, "Don't leave me behind." The truck roared to life. I slammed the gas. The thing lunged, slamming its hands against the window, but I was already speeding out of the lot. I didn't look back. I drove for hours, only stopping when the sun rose, my hands still white-knuckled around the wheel. When I finally called the cops, they checked the gas station. They found nothing. No footprints. No signs of forced entry. And my truck? It was still parked in the lot. The doors were locked, the keys on the seat. Like I had never been there at all. I quit trucking not long after that. And I always check the back seat now. Because sometimes, the worst thing on the road isn't the loneliness. Sometimes, it's what's riding with you. Story 3. I've been driving long hauls for almost 15 years now. You get used to the roads, the hours, the isolation. Some guys go stir-crazy after a few months. But me? I've always liked the quiet. Until that Tuesday night in Montana. It was a long stretch North Dakota to Idaho. Nothing but miles of flat, empty highway ahead of me. The sky was pitch black, not a single other car in sight, and I was running on fumes. I hadn't slept in almost 36 hours. I reached into my bag, fumbling for the small bottle of smelling salts I kept for emergencies. One strong sniff, and my brain jolted awake, my vision sharpening, my pulse kicking up. They always burned like hell, but they worked. The road stretched on, endless. Just me, the hum of the engine, and the occasional rustling of the trees along the shoulder. Then, I saw it. A dress, lying in the middle of the road. I barely had time to react before my tires screeched, the semi shuddering to a stop. My pulse hammered in my ears as I sat there, staring at the crumpled fabric lying on the asphalt. It was purple, torn in places, looking weathered and out of place in the middle of nowhere. A chill crawled up my spine. I rubbed my eyes, half convinced I was hallucinating from exhaustion. But no, it was still there. Then, a pair of shoes. About 20 yards ahead, sitting neatly on the yellow lines. I swallowed hard, scanning the road for movement. Nothing. The hair on my arms prickled. I shifted the truck into gear, telling myself to just go, to put this behind me. But before I could, I heard it. A scream. A child's scream. High-pitched. Sharp. Coming from the woods. Every nerve in my body screamed at me to leave. To lock my doors, push the gas, and forget I ever saw anything. But I didn't. Because I have a little girl back home. And that scream? That scream sounded exactly like her. I threw the truck in park and grabbed my flashlight, stepping out into the cold night air. The wind had stopped, the trees now eerily still. I walked toward the edge of the road, scanning the trees with my beam of light. "Hello," I called. The wood swallowed my voice. Then another scream. It was deeper this time, more distorted, like it had been played through a cheap speaker and warped. My stomach twisted. I aimed my flashlight toward the sound, my fingers tightening around the grip. Then I saw them. Eyes. Deep in the woods. Too many of them. And they were staring at me. My breath hitched. The eyes blinked, too many of them, scattered at different heights, staring from the darkness. Some were low to the ground, others perched unnaturally high, peering between the trees like they had been waiting for me. I took a slow step back, my boots crunching against the pavement. Then movement. A shape detached itself from the shadows, stepping into the edge of my flashlight beam. A man. No, not quite. His skin was pale, almost gray, stretched too tight over his bones. His head tilted unnaturally to one side, his mouth hanging slightly open like he had forgotten how to close it. His eyes were wrong, wide, unblinking, too reflective under the light. In his arms, he held a child, a little girl. Her limbs hung limply, her face turned away, her dress purple and torn, the same one I had seen in the road. I froze, my stomach twisting in knots. "Hey," I shouted. Is she okay? The man didn't react. He just stood there, staring. Then his mouth moved. It didn't open wider. His lips didn't part. But I heard him. She is yours. His voice didn't come from him. It came from everywhere, from the trees, from the darkness, from the low hum of the night itself. I felt something cold wrap around my spine, an instinctive, primal terror I couldn't explain. I took another step back. Put her down, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Let me help her. The thing tilted its head further, like a broken puppet being tested for movement. She is yours. Then the little girl twitched. My breath caught. Her fingers curled, her shoulders jerked, like something was pulling the strings inside her skin. Slowly, too slowly, she lifted her head, and I saw her face. I stopped breathing, because it was my daughter's face. Not a resemblance, not a trick of the light. It was her nose, her freckles, her wide brown eyes staring at me, unblinking. But she was wrong. Her mouth stretched too wide, her lips curling into a grin that didn't belong to her. Then she spoke, in my voice. You left me behind. My body locked up. I hadn't moved, I hadn't spoken, but there it was. My own voice, dripping from her lips, curling into something mocking. You left me behind. The wind picked up, and suddenly, the eyes in the trees began to move. Shape shifted, rising, too tall, too thin, crawling toward the light. Coming for me. I ran. I spun back toward my truck, my heart slamming against my ribs as I sprinted for the door. I felt them behind me, the wind carrying low whispers that were too many voices at once. My fingers fumbled with the handle. I ripped the door open, threw myself inside, and slammed the lock down just as something slammed against the glass. I didn't look. I didn't want to see. I jammed the keys into the ignition, my hands shaking so hard I nearly missed. The truck roared to life. Outside, the whispers grew louder. I glanced at the mirror, and my stomach dropped. The little girl was standing behind the truck now, alone, her face still frozen in that awful, too wide grin. Her lips moved, but the sound I heard wasn't her voice. It was my daughter's real voice, coming from somewhere in the trees. Daddy, help me. I nearly lost control of the truck. I floored the gas. The tires screeched, the rig lurched forward, and I sped down the highway, my breath coming in ragged gasps. In the rearview mirror, I saw her standing in the middle of the road, watching me go. As I drove, I called my ex. My daughter was asleep, safe at home. But the whispering stayed with me. And the next morning, when I checked my truck, there was a purple dress stuffed under my seat. I don't stop for anything on the road anymore. Because sometimes, what's waiting for you out there knows your name.